mucho construction happening out my window.
Well, let's say we're live now, so we're hearing about the construction at Kate's place. But yeah, here we are, dive into world building, and today we're talking about taxes. And yeah, and we should have some more guests coming in as the hour goes on. So hopefully this will be cool. Hopefully this will be fun and interesting, and I mean useful, right? Because taxes are a big narrative element in some stories, like I would say Robin Hood. But you know what? Your audio is really weird, Kate.
Yeah.
Okay, is that better?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, way better.
Okay. People set taxes in feudalism because it's easy. Like, all the money goes to the king decides where it goes, bing, you're done.
Yeah.
But, and I'm not sure whether it's because people don't actually know how the sausage is made in any other system.
Right.
I would think that given the outcome of the recent election, that's probably the case.
Uh-huh.
But it takes out all of the really neat interplay of factions of people trying to get this stuff for their people.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the ADA, you have the AMA, you have, all these different factions and groups trying to represent one group of people and make sure that they get their needs met. Well, those are all characters, and the institutions themselves are characters playing off of each other as well.
Yeah. So, yeah. So let's back up for a second and say, in feudalism, you've got this thing where everything goes to the king and you probably never see it again. I mean, really. But I think that the concept behind taxes is that we exist not simply as individuals. I mean, I suppose some people live out in the middle of nowhere and are subsistence farmers and have to provide everything for their own survival. But in fact, the rest of us who are not subsistence farmers in remote regions are part of a society. And so basically the function of taxes is to pay for things that the society needs as opposed to things that the individual needs, because the individual needs things but isn't able to pay individually for things like roads or schools or police officers and fire departments. And so these are things that are needed collectively by the community. And so the cost for those things is spread among the members of the community through the means of taxes. That's, I guess, sort of the underlying concept behind it. And so I really like what you're saying, Kate. I just want to see if we can kind of connect the dots a little bit more to get to that point. So I'm writing some notes here.
Yeah, I mean, because not everything used to be covered. Like, there was not a fire department.
Right.
Like cities didn't have those.
In fact, we were just learning about Coit Tower. And in San Francisco, during the lifetime of the woman whose bequest was used to build Coit Tower, there were competing fire departments in the city. And whoever arrived at the fire first would get paid. And so you had these like fire department races through the streets as they tried to get paid, right? I mean,
and they're more interested. The problem is that they're more interested in beating each other than they are than putting out the fire.
Well,
I'm sure it's
there are factors involved, but I mean, I think that was not that long ago.
No, it was like the 1800s, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it was not that long ago, and there are a lot of things. I think the U.S. the U.S. is very non-transparent in its tax system.
Yeah. Mail was another thing that was not paid for by taxes, that you just paid for as you went.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. So, and well, so the equation should be, you know, you pay money into a pool, and that pool provides all of the things that the larger community needs. I mean, that's sort of the theory behind the whole thing.
Yeah.
Schools,
including national defense.
Yeah.
Which is a whole can of worms.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't think I want to go to there because I'm not interested in talking about what we feel our current national priorities should be as Americans.
Well, and that's like the entire like the military industrial complex. That's like an entire thing of its own.
Yeah. Because after all, the community is this sort of amorphous group, right? And the question then becomes, and this is how we get back to what Kate was mentioning earlier, if you're paying into a pool which covers everything the society needs, how do people decide what society needs? I mean, there's some things that are seemingly really obvious, right? But the minute you decide to say, the minute you say, well, society needs, then you're sort of eliding all of these subgroups that society is made up of, right? And,
well, and sure, I mean, we had societies before we had the germ theory of disease.
Yeah.
So thinking about what society needs, sewers didn't come along until way late in society.
Yeah.
You know, and we do need them, but that's sort of a thing. It's like where people think of feudalism as a huge, big thing from 1000 to 1984. But there are places where different things were accorded different weight as far as we need to do this now. You know, Mohenjo-Daro doesn't have roads. You just kind of wander around on people's ceilings and let yourself down through a trapdoor. Yeah, you know, so there are people, you know.
Where is this? Can you write it in the chat?
I can't write in chat. Mohenjo-Daro. It's one of the early civilizations.
Can you spell it?
It's right there. I spell it.
Oh, okay, great.
So there are all these things in the evolution of society as we know it that didn't necessarily happen when we thought they did.
Yeah.
And they can have really interesting effects on your society if you choose not to do them.
Yeah. Well, you know, I always think that it's good to question assumptions about what kind of things go together. And by that, I mean, like, we take for granted all these things that allow our lives to operate smoothly, like trash service. You know, I mean, we pay for that. That's a utility. It's partly paid for, but I mean, like, so how much? I don't even know the answer to this question. Like, utilities, how much of utility is funded by tax money? I don't know. Is any of it, or are we just dealing with a large business like an insurance company? I don't know. But anyway, but I still think that niggling down into the underpinnings, right, of all of these things that we take for granted is very, very useful when you're world building.
Yes.
Right. And taxes are going to be connected to a lot of that. So do you have roads? Do you have sewers? Do you have running water? Right? How are all those things linked? I was actually thinking the other day about how we keep water contained in our homes.
Yep.
We have these special places where it comes out and it goes immediately into a receptacle, and it's just this little window where the water can get out. Right? And so we've got all these systems to keep water contained, and we've got all kinds of things. I mean, we pay for, and taxes pay for things like our clean air indirectly.
Mm-hmm.
Right, through regulations on somebody's out there being paid by taxes, checking to make sure that companies are following the rules on clean air.
Not
right?
anymore.
Well, no,
Sorry,
but sort of they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, your sound went out again, Kate.
What kind of history does your world have? Because all of those things exist here because we have looked at the tragedy of the commons and went, oh, that was a bad idea.
Yeah.
Maybe we should do something about that. But if that hasn't happened in your world, then you've got people, defecating in the open and not caring and, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could set up a society where everybody was expected to keep their own stuff completely under control. But then where are the limits of that, right? And how does the community enforce on somebody who's not carrying their weight and stuff like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, do they need a good shunning? Do we have stocks? What's going on?
Maybe you raise their taxes. You take like 10%
Ooh.
more of their grain.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, well, if you're not going to do this, then you need to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If only we could do that to Walmart.
Yeah, for sure.
This also sort of a little bit begs the question of what payment is accepted.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
For your taxes, because it could be anything from livestock to grain to, I don't know, public service or something.
Yeah.
A year's indenturehood of your oldest son.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. That'll pay down your whatever you owe the government.
Mm-hmm.
1 year's indenture. Sucks for the oldest son, I would have to say.
Mm-hmm.
Now see, one of my notes says people. That's helpful.
People. Do we sing?
I was going to write something down and then I stopped. That's okay. That's okay. I have often speculated about, because money is a useful thing and we've had hangouts about it, right?
Yep.
Money is sort of like a mutual societal agreement on a symbol of value, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's very useful in that way. But I have sometimes wondered, because there are all these assumptions about flying around about how people will take advantage to whatever extent they can, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to some degree, that's true. But a lot of economic models don't turn a blind eye to things like emotional labor and literal actual labor, where women are doing work inside the home and not being paid for it with the traditional symbolic money currency, right? And so a lot of work happens in society that's not paid.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have speculated sometimes about what it would be like to be in how a society would develop if it were developed without the concept of money, but under a sort of a mutual obligation kind of I'm trying, emotional labor pact, I suppose you could say, where altruism is sort of like the goal, and how much you would be expected to expend effort for your neighbors, etc., would be the basis on which things were negotiated. Right? That would change a lot of things. And taxes in that kind of a format might take the form of community service, right? Yeah, I don't know.
That's an interesting concept. I'm not sure you could do it with humans, but I could see like aliens.
Well, I mean, I think you actually could. The problem is that we are so ingrained in what we have that if this were not an option, I mean, what if, why do all clocks go clockwise?
Yeah.
Because that just was how it worked out, I think you could do it with humans, but you probably couldn't do it with humans today.
I think you'd have to like genetically engineer better people somehow.
I missed that.
It depends on what the service would be.
Yeah.
You think about the people who are going to be providing these services, and since they're previous bad actors, what do you want them to do? Babysit?
No.
Well, then you're also having to overcome assumptions about what people can do. And I guess, you'll start with different assumptions, because babysit is a term that is often used, or has been often used, as describing what fathers do with their own children when mama isn't around.
Right. And I think, the key point was not so much that babysitting is a particular type of activity, but that you don't want bad actors teaching the young.
Or in your home, or, doing a bunch of the things that we would think of as support roles. I would like to point out, though, that as many feminist men there are saying, I am an equal parent, I have yet to see more than about 2 in reality.
Well, I mean, so that's sort of a little a thought experiment, right?
Yeah.
And in that case, taxes, I imagine that a tax of service would have to be something like, well, what are you really good at? Because there's got to be a recognition that some people are going to be really good at some things and other people are not going to be good at those things. And then there are also those things. I mean, I feel like, I don't know, part of the reason why this gets on my mind is that when you're running a household, there's a whole lot of stuff that has to get done, and none of it is paid, right?
None of it is fun.
And well, no, some people enjoy some things more, and other people enjoy other things more. And then there's this short list of things that nobody likes to do, right? So given that is the nature of tasks, how do you then apportion the labor? How do you, do you say, well, it doesn't matter what people like to do, that they just, everybody's got to do the same? I mean, there are all kinds of options, but I mean, so let's get back to taxes for a minute.
Yeah. But no, I think that money exists because you have these inequalities in skill and desire and supply and demand of things, and skills. Anyway, and so taxes are that's why you use money for taxes.
Yeah.
So how
It's
would
also
you get around
expedient,
that?
because it's a set rate. It's like if you're taxing in grain and livestock, well, how do you know you're not getting, ripped off by having to give 10 chickens as your taxes, but that guy only had to give 5 pounds of grain.
Right, right.
Whereas if it's an X amount of money, then everyone, you know what you're paying out at least.
If your 10 chickens are just as good as the other guy's 10 chickens.
Well, I mean, so then that's when you get into the question of markets and what the value of things is.
Yeah.
And so that has its own sort of way of maintaining itself, et cetera. But I agree that money eliminates the need to. It doesn't eliminate the need to, but it functions as the means by which we equate different things that are not equal to one another.
Yes, because it's difficult to carry 4 chickens around in your back pocket.
Right. And
how do you make change?
You need the special pockets.
Metric, right? How do you convert grain to chickens? How do you convert chickens to gold jewelry, right?
But you're also dealing with the size of a system. If you've got a village that takes up 10 square miles, which is, I guess, as villages go, kind of big.
That would be pretty.
10 square miles is the size of Ithaca, which is a city.
Well, maybe you count the fields. Yeah.
Okay. So the furthest that you have to transport anything, is that diameter of a circle, or whatever shape it is. You don't have to spend days carting something across a continent, whether it's chickens or a laborer or information.
Right.
So
information, right.
Yeah. And if you're talking about wow, it just went poof. If you're talking about a big society where you're taxing a huge system like that, then you need the constant standard. You need a standard that will work from one side of the country to the other, from one population set to another. But if you're talking about a village, you have a better idea what your skill sets are. You have a better idea what your resources are in terms of food and tools and that sort of thing. And you have a pretty good idea of what the conditions are, what the weather's going to be like. Are you going to be able to move things across the village in an hour or 2 hours?
Yeah.
And it's much easier to keep on top of what the changes are.
Well, and there's also the idea that if whoever the king or governing body is manages to standardize things, then that gets easier. Amphorae came in 2 sizes, big and small. And that was pretty much true across the Roman world. And so it didn't matter what was in it. It was whatever that was times, this size amphorae, because that's how much you're getting.
Yeah, if I'm remembering rightly, didn't standardized weights and measures come in Babylonian times specifically for taxation purposes?
I believe so, yes.
Not surprising.
Hi,
There's
Brian.
also church taxes.
Tithing.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Well, and it's also, that is a big fraught issue, because not only does the church collect tithing, it tended to be the engine of education for the children.
Yeah.
So in a way, you're paying for your kids to go to school, but you're also paying for the other things the church does. That was also where a lot of the altruism was coming from until recently.
Well, and then you have the fact that churches in the United States are not asked to pay taxes. Right. And but now increasingly they're being run like businesses. And so
do you remember the scandals not that long ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, over the wealth of a cardinal in the Roman Catholic Church in Germany? I discovered the cause of this recently because I deal with international payroll. Germany has a church tax, and it's significant. It's a significant amount. It was originally paid out of the taxes that were collected from everybody. So the state was collecting taxes, and they would pass a certain sum over to the church automatically. Recently, the system was changed. Church tax is now deducted and paid directly as a visible component of individual taxation in Germany. As a result of this, people began to realize how much of their taxes were going to the church. You are able to declare your religion in Germany, and you are able to declare that you don't have a religion and that you shouldn't pay church tax. The Catholic Church incomes in Germany were in danger of going down so much as a result of these changes that they actually started to say, if you don't pay the church tax, you won't be allowed to come to Mass.
Problem?
Well, this is the Catholic Church.
Yeah, not for me.
Yep. I'd be like,
But-
bah.
I know, and that's what was happening. So the
but what
churches...
you have people who are Catholics who are like, hey, I don't have to pay this. Right?
Yeah, sure, but 10 years down the line, when you want your daughter to get married in the same church you were married in, guess who's real unhappy with you?
Yeah, right.
You know, are people who aren't paying the tax allowed to take communion? Like gay people aren't allowed to take communion here.
Wait, what?
What?
That's a thing?
Yeah, that's a thing.
Oh.
In the Catholic Church or?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, just Catholics.
Lutherans don't care.
Yeah, Lutherans don't care. Don't Episcopalians, I don't think, care either.
No, I don't think Episcopalians care.
No, they don't.
They'll do it. They'll do it. They're like Catholicism light anyway. So they're like,
Yeah.
They-
Like, we
they-
be Unitarians, but it's just a step too far.
Well, so
Methodist.
I'm going to take us back onto the theoretical
Back to taxes,
level here
yes.
for a second.
taxes.
And I'm going to say, when you so taxation is a thing that happens so that we can support our society. Fine, we're all members of a society. This is great. Whatever. There are complications that can happen to that, and I think it's worth asking. How do you classify membership in a society, right?
Well, that's a good question.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about, like, you know, here we are building worlds and this, that, and the other.
Well, no, but I mean, I think that people who live in the West have this really unlooked at bunch of assumptions about who would be in the part of the society, and how much they are obligated to uphold that society,
Right.
and depending on what you get back. You know, it's sort of that thing of when white people go, well, how come black people always burn down their own cities? They don't own that stuff. It's not theirs. What do they care? So
I hear that.
So when you look at, okay, who is obligated up to support the society, who are considered citizens, you know, since so much of this is done feudally, you got a huge class of servants and slaves. They're not citizens. How much are they required to uphold this society? And are they themselves part of the groups of people who are either not upholding or destroying parts of it because they don't want to be where they are?
Yep.
There's also who's a productive member of society, which is sort of a
Good
subset,
point.
because, you know, when you're talking about things like taxes, children don't pay taxes for the most part. There's you know, your whole employed paid money investment set of children that gets very complicated, but they're not productive members of society, but they're supposed to become productive members of society, at which point they
Right.
will be expected to pay taxes. But in the
Yeah.
meantime,
Well, and then
gotta
you've got
take
the
care of them.
disabled too.
And right, and then it gets more complicated because children are expected to become productive members of society. Disabled people as a group are not, though that is
But then,
Though that's also arguable. I mean, there's a lot of different variations there, and
yeah.
I think
which is why I said as a
the fact that
group.
people are not expected to be contributing members actually hurts people
Yeah,
in that group, in addition to, you know, because some of them are able to be, but are ostracized because people don't expect them to be.
and there's
Right, and I
levels
think
of
that
what
they
you
would have
call-
historically filled the beggar class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they need the support of tax funded programs in
Right.
order to be productive, as
Right.
productive as they would like to and are able to.
And this is where you get back to what can you contribute?
Yeah.
What are your skills? But I think the whole church tax thing, because in the U.S. we don't have church taxes. We have, if you belong to a congregation, you may pay a membership fee in order to get particular services. You know, less, you know, lower tuition for the associated religious school, or burial plots, or special seating at major services, or whatever, for services that you use that nobody else uses. School taxes are a thing that some people don't want to pay because they don't have kids and they don't understand how they need to pay the school taxes, because actually having schools benefits them, if in no
Having
other
an
way than it
educated
keeps,
population.
yeah, and if no other way, as one of my neighbors put it, it keeps the smart kids off the street and out
Right.
of trouble.
The last thing we need is smarter criminals.
He's happy to pay his school taxes, but it's the things that society benefits from that individuals don't, that they have to think about. Which is where I think that this is why I mentioned school taxes and not.
There seems to be a significant cultural difference, as far as I can tell, between the US and most other Western societies about this. Because I really don't see those same sort of complaints going on anywhere else. The whole, like, why should I pay taxes for schools when I don't have kids? Why should I pay taxes for this when I don't?
Really American.
Most other places do say, you know, well, this is for society as a whole. It's a collective. We're all contributing, and all of us get different bits and pieces out of it. I might not, you know, like to pay for schools, but I get benefits from other things. It's a very peculiar American thing, and it applies to taxation, and it even applies to the concept of insurance, that the idea is that you should only pay for things that you get back. It simply doesn't work that way. It never has worked that way, and it cannot work that way.
The U.S. has very peculiar history of development. I think that it's huge, and it spreads, and it's largely agrarian based, where your kids are doing something besides going to school. That's something that's way more useful.
Well, it's also sort of the glorification of the individual. The fact that we were brought about by rebelling over taxes.
Yeah,
I mean,
which it should be said, we're not income taxes.
Yeah.
We're not individual taxes.
Yeah.
They were trade taxes.
Yeah.
Income tax is a modern outlier. Taxing the individual is a comparatively modern invention that does not fit with much of taxation throughout history. The first income taxes I know of were imposed to pay for the Napoleonic War, and they've generally been imposed to pay for wars. And then mysteriously, they've never gone away again when the war's been paid for.
Well, it's the way, like, tolls don't go away.
Now, those were income taxes, or were they trade taxes?
No, income taxes were imposed. The Napoleonic Wars income taxes were imposed to raise money for the government to be able to afford to keep fighting. They simply weren't raising enough money elsewhere, and it was explicitly stated in the Parliamentary Act that they were imposed on, that they would be a temporary measure and would be phased out once the war was over. And
Right,
here
and
we are 200 years later, and that hasn't happened.
Right. So okay. So this is actually a good place to be, because now let's talk briefly about what kinds of things get taxed.
Ooh, window tax.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I've seen it. I lived near houses that have bricked up windows because they had been bricked up because of window tax. The current thing in the UK is bedroom tax.
Oh, yeah.
That's a recent one in the UK. If you have a spare bedroom, you get an extra tax bill for it. If it's not occupied. So if two of you live in a 3-bedroom house, then you get an extra tax burden.
And actually, there is street
So I
front
guess you better
tax.
Airbnb.
There's a tax, and I can't remember where it is. I think it might be the Netherlands, where the amount of space that you have that faces the street is how you get taxed, and so you get these really skinny, long buildings.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure which came first on those, because it's actually pretty practical to have narrow buildings the way the limited space in Dutch towns, because but yes, that is a thing. Frontage tax.
Mm-hmm. And
all sorts of things. What will tend to happen is that the authorities will try and find a way of taxing something that allows them loopholes, and that if you have enough money and influence, you can have a loophole that will get round that, whereas other people don't have that luxury. So you can pretend that it's fair, because it's like, look, if your house has more frontage, then you pay more, because obviously it's a bigger house. And what they'll actually do is buy a house with a narrow frontage, and then they'll knock through to the back part of other houses, which will get halved in size but still have a frontage. Their huge house will extend around out the back of all this space, and most people don't have the option to do that. So all sorts of taxes are done this way.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that anytime you're going to create a society where you have a tax system, it's good to think about what those loopholes could be and how people who are rich are taking advantage of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, but for much of history, the majority of taxation income has come from impositions on trade. And that is why for much of recorded history, there have been smugglers. We don't have anything like as much in the way of smuggling now, because the tax base is completely different. But up until around the 1800s, smuggling was huge, because the imposition of trade or port taxes was the major income source.
Mm.
You charge a tax on every point of transfer.
Yep.
Yeah, and then there's the...
Generally speaking, yes, and then you'd have free ports. There would be specifically established free ports that would be allowed to operate without taxation, and they would thrive on the incidental money that was being spent in them, because everyone was going there to avoid taxes. So just money would be coming in from outside, because while all those people were coming in, they would be buying services and goods and so forth in the free port.
Right. And I'm also going to say, since we're talking about ways to get around taxes, income tax is not treated equally. All types of income are not treated equally. And specifically, income that comes from investments in the United States is treated as though it's not income, but is somehow something different. And this allows very, very rich people who have a lot of investments to pay almost nothing on their investment income, and pretend to have a job and pay taxes ostensibly fairly on whatever little amount they get relative to their entire investment portfolio. So that, I think, is an artificial distinction that's been created specifically for rich people by rich people.
Likewise, tax various things that you are allowed to write off against tax.
Yeah.
Charitable contributions is one. It depends what you define as a charity. there is when I worked for a large company, a large American company, we had a CEO who had an interesting little trick to deal with his taxes one year. He had a friend of his literally write a book about how great he was. I'm not kidding. There was this book that was basically a hagiography about this guy is like the best manager ever. He's leading this company to, new heights, etc., etc. This book was produced in hardback. It wasn't a huge volume, but it was significant. It had a retail price, therefore, of $25. I never saw it on any bookshelves in any shops, but it was given to every member of the company, which was about 70,000 people, if I remember, and copies were given to every library in the United States. Giving it to every library in the United States counted as a charitable donation.
Oh, jeez.
The value of the charitable donation was the list price of the book, $25. The actual production cost of the book was around, we think we calculated as about $175. I can't remember exactly. It was less than 10%. Therefore, he was able to write off a charitable donation that was worth far more in the reduction of his taxes than the actual cost. As long as he had the money and the resource to invest to do this thing in the first place, he could write off millions, literally millions of dollars in taxes. For a cost of less than 10%. So he'd write off, taxes that were going to cost him 25%. It only cost him 10%. So it was worth his while. He made money by doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I feel like this brings up a little bit of Treasury agents, people who go out and find fraud and investigate and bring up criminal charges against people who are defrauding the system. And because I think you see a lot of tax collectors in genre. But I sort of remember this only because it was in the last season of Archer, where Archer's in a coma and he's having this dream.
No spoilers. I haven't seen Dreamland yet.
Oh,
no spoilers.
Okay.
I'll take my headphones off.
But we I think we sort of forget about
the Treasury agents.
Yeah, Treasury agents. Because tax collectors are sort of uniformly evil. But then there is such a thing as Treasury agents who would make for possibly an incredibly boring book or a very unique one.
Magical Treasury agents.
Well, Treasury agent should be
the Emperor's tax investigator. I can see the trilogy now.
Yeah, right. I don't know. Just somebody go forth and make this interesting.
The Emperor's tax investigator finds out that the Emperor himself is cheating on his tax.
Well, is he cheating or is he simply using legal means? There's in the UK there is a very specific terminological difference. There is tax avoidance versus tax evasion. Avoidance is perfectly legal. It is using existing even loopholes in the law. As long as it is technically legal, you're okay. The moment you go from tax avoidance to tax evasion, you're a criminal.
Yeah.
But yes, we have specific different terms for doing it.
Well, and there's also the sort of Appalachian Western American, actually Eastern American thing, which would be, what you do when we see a revenuer? Shoot to kill.
I think that's the entire plot, isn't it?
I believe so, actually.
No, he was a U.S. Marshal, though.
Yeah.
It was pretty much that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Structurally, that's what it was, as far as I can understand.
Yeah, I mean, because can anyone define quickly in 10 words or less what a U.S. Marshal does?
Oh, yeah.
These days, mostly transport prisoners.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's mostly transport prisoners, but they also do work for,
I think, in fact, there's a
something-
speed.
Dang it, I knew this. I knew this because it was like, I was like so surprised when I found out where they started from.
Well, yeah, didn't they start as Pinkertons or something?
No, they started off as like, as something with treasury agents. They started off as like something wacky. I was like, what? It's more like, what did they start as? If I can find their wiki.
Oh, here we go. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 tasked marshals to enforce the law, recover, and arrest fugitive slaves.
Yay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
There's a
marshals
shock.
were the people. Yeah, right. Marshals were the people who set out and found the Dalton Gang, Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, etc. That's the whole thing with the OK Corral. They also helped suppress the Pullman strike.
Yeah, they had jurisdiction across county and state lines, which sheriffs and so forth didn't. So they were, in a sense, they were a kind of a precursor of the FBI. They were the people who could follow people who had gone, like, you know, sure, I robbed a bank in Yuma, but I'm in Phoenix now, so the Yuma guys can't touch me.
Interjurisdictional.
Yar.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're getting close to the end here, but I did want to mention one more thing, which is universal basic income.
Well, that was something I wanted to bring up earlier, was that one of the things that I think would be revolutionary in terms of world building and plot would be for motherhood to be a paid job. Like, that's the job you're doing.
Yep.
But what if you don't want to be a mother?
Then you need to go and get an actual job.
I'd like
But
to
it's
find
totally
out as
fine.
parental care rather than motherhood.
Sure.
But yes.
Yeah. No,
Sure.
but I mean, if it were paid, it would be because childcare now is paid, but being a home parent is not.
Right. And
then
speaking
the
as someone
question
without
becomes,
children,
well,
it's the most important job we have.
Well, you know, and then the question comes, who pays? And I think that would be an education related expense, and it would be a tax paid job, because you couldn't have a husband paying the wife, because then or then the husband would have to be paid twice as much, or vice versa, wife paying for the child care provided by the husband, or whatever. Do you see my point? So maybe it would be paid by taxes.
But a problem that arises from doing this is okay, you say that, and I entirely agree, child rearing is an incredibly important job, but if it's paid for by the state, how do you ensure that the job is being done to the standards that the state requires?
Who's going to regulate
but I mean, that's the interesting thing, right? Because then you would have all of this other stuff. See, this is why it would be so interesting to try to speculate about this, because then if you had state paying for it, then you could actually have standards established that people could be expected to uphold. And that would open up another whole can of worms, right? Because
certainly would in the US.
Deciding how to rear children, et cetera, et cetera.
But you could establish state minimums for nutrition, for education, for all children, and you wouldn't have to say, okay, well, you have to go to school. We have to figure out how to make sure that all of these children are at school. Once they're in school, we can make sure that they all have food.
Yeah,
well, yeah. I mean, to spin that around,
more money per kid. Are you just going to have women just breeding unending to get like more money?
Oh, Jay, no.
Hey,
that is actually
with, like, tell that to those people with like 20 kids, though.
No, it's a common narrative. It's a very common narrative.
Very, very common.
Actually,
but it's not as common. It's not as. Yes, it's common, but it's not universal. And there are women who will do what I just did and laugh in your face if you say, well, if we pay you to breed, you will breed unchecked.
Let's just say, okay, so there is no such thing as breeding unchecked in my personal world, because that would kill me. Okay.
Yeah.
But And it would kill basically anybody. It just depends on how long they would be able to get away with it before that happened. But one of the things that I think is a very standard assumption in the United States is that abuse of a system is a terrible, terrible thing. And in many cases, Americans would rather wreck the system than tolerate any form of abuse of it, even like 1%.
Yep.
Right? This is the whole justification behind voter suppression on the basis of voter fraud, right?
Well, and healthcare.
Or this obsession people have with taking welfare recipients and testing them for drugs. I mean, that's also punishing the poor and stuff like that. But that there is a sort of a national obsession around, oh my gosh, there's going to be abuse of this system, blah, blah, blah. You know, socialist systems get abused, and they have means to enforce how those systems are being used. But actually, what I wanted to say about universal basic income for just 2 seconds, since we're right at the end of the hour, is that to a certain extent, you've got this thing where labor has a value, right? And then part of that value, or potentially all of that value, gets returned to the society for redistribution, right? And so that's kind of what you have going on. And what kind of governmental system or societal system you have depends on how much of that income is expected to go back to the society. If it's all of it, then you have communal property and communism, etc., and you've got certain types of problems. If it's part of it, then you're having you know, a taxation system, or even, you know, if it's a lot of it, maybe universal basic income, and how does that work? So I don't know, but I thought it was interesting to consider this question of the value of labor versus the value of society, and how much value is assigned to the labor and how much of that is returned to the society. And I think those are some of the major variables going on when you talk about how societies work and how taxation works. And basically, the more complicated the system, the more different places where individual actors or group actors can influence what is being taxed or who gets money of what kinds, and that sort of thing. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of really interesting stuff. But it's, you know, these are the building blocks that can be used to kind of extrapolate and find different kinds of systems. So anyway, I think we're actually
sort of like
time, but
yeah. I was gonna say, like, Star Trek. What did people pay taxes with in Star Trek?
They didn't. They were part of the government. So I'm assuming the same thing happens with people who are currently serving. I don't think that they do pay taxes.
Yeah, but that wouldn't be like everybody, because there were like just like there have to be normal people in Star Trek.
I'm just gonna giggle now.
Who aren't part of Starfleet, who are civilians who somehow have to pay taxes because nobody had money. It was all like credits or something.
yeah.
So
But that's just a semantic word for money.
Okay, yeah.
So, you know,
I mean,
you make 6,000 credits a month. We're going to tax you 2,000 of them. Yeah.
Kate's right, because really money is not an object. It's a mutual agreement.
Yeah,
Yes.
That's true.
Symbolized by something, whether that be bitcoins or you know, credits is a thing. It's a mutual agreement on value. You know, it's money. So anyway, well, you guys are all awesome, and this has been so complicated and interesting, and I really appreciate you all being here. And I'm still working on an author for this month, because my author was going to have a little window to do it, and then and things got a little more complicated for her. So, so I'm hoping that she'll be coming to visit after she gets back from this big trip that she has coming up. And in the meantime, talk to me if you have an author that you would like to see on the show, because I am still looking for somebody to come and visit in July. And I'm going to thank you all and stop the broadcast.